Today will be the first day I do a log just about some interest or a TV show or a game I've been playing. Well, I guess in today's case it'll be a game that I have played, not recently playing, but just thoughts and opinions and just thinking on it. And that'll be nice. It'll cheer me up a bit from this morning. my my sleep was pretty spotty. Pretty much the entire time I was asleep, oh, it was just dreams. A long sequence of little vignettes of me interacting with that person, and it was just like vignette after vignette after vignette, like over a dozen of just like things starting out normal, situations starting out normal, and then it slowly falling apart into just a mess. Each interaction slowly just devolving into all kinds of negative situations, and then being threatened and and just being scared and anxiety. It wasn't nice. It certainly wasn't nice to wake up to. I woke up with a just mind haze for almost the entire day, till I took a short nap and finally got rid of it. My rest wasn't particularly restful. It's like a malignant version of those school dreams, but I finally stopped having those school dreams, but I guess I'm gonna start having those dreams now. Now that time has passed by, I guess it's like leftover poison in the body, and it's gonna start getting processed, which I'm not too fond of. But we'll have to see. But that's what this is for, which is today I'm just gonna talk about Metroid, just in general, just going from each game to each game and just talking about my thoughts on each one, or just little things that I liked, or little details. I even wrote down some notes, and I had some bigger things I wanted to talk about that, well, I don't have anyone to talk about with. My one very good friend, he doesn't know anything about Metroid. So we wouldn't really have a back and forth on that to create something for me to talk about. Or to, help me think of things. I would mostly just be talking at the person. And just, so I asked Copilot some things, and we had a little back and forth, and helped me to organize my thoughts a little more on some ideas that I was thinking of. But that mostly won't come until later, when I start talking about retro studios specifically, and the Metroid games that they made. And there's quite a bit there, because that's where things are the most rocky, I guess you could say. It's where things get the most fluctuations once you hand it off to someone else to work on it. But in the meantime, let me start with, let's see, I already have it pulled up here. Every Metroid game by initial release date. So I'll start with just Metroid, the original one. I'm gonna be honest, I've never beaten it, and I I've never gotten very far in it. But some thoughts I had about it, which was I guess like it's just very crude, you know. It's the first one in the series. It's where they were getting everything started. It doesn't convey much. Not that they really could convey much. It's got the first design of Samus's suit, which I'm not terribly fond of of the design of Samus's suit in the first game. It's it's okay. It's just unrefined, you know. It hasn't gotten to where it's going to be in the future, but it's got I'd say the Japanese box art is it's pretty close. Like it has a lot of aspects of what the design would look like later. One thing I do really like, again, mainly about the box art, is the mix of that sort of. I've always seen Metroid as sort of being a mix of Alien, obviously, lots of Alien influence, Geiger, and that kind of art style, but mixed with pulp science fiction. It has that very pulpy science fiction feel to it, you know, old, like you'd see in old science fiction magazines and things like that, you know, Mother Brain, and she wants to use an alien race to take over the galaxy. It has that kind of, you know, attackers from Mars, kind of the some kind of alien race ending with oid. Well, I mean Metroid, but in this case, like the 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 nebuloids, or you know, something like that. It has that very pulp science fiction feel to it. It's nothing grand. It's not, you know, like Star Wars, organized military, Western kind of thing. It's more like goof kind of. They're not that they meant them to be goofy, but kind of we would see them today. Kind of, you know, the goofy cylindrical robots, and they kind of waddle around, and the guy in a or in this case girl in a spacesuit. But you know, in terms of the pulp fiction, they tended to have the pulp science fiction. They tended to have the male protagonists. Like I'm gonna look up old pulp science, old pulp sci-fi. There we go, shorthand. Yeah, you've got the guy on the cover holding the ray gun, and he's got like the he's got the spacesuit on. Maybe there's like a bug-headed alien and a planet with some rings around it in the background, and a UFO, or yeah, a robot with kind of like a big stuffy kind of astronaut-looking suit, or a gray alien, and like lots of like angles and triangles, a robot with a golden face. And, you know, it has that kind of Metroid has that kind of incredible space stories, pulp science fiction, wonder stories, weird tales from outer space, astounding stories of science fiction. It has that, you know, like mutants and aliens and weird spaceships and things like that. Yeah, ray guns, and it has that feel to it. Those old pulp science fictions, thrilling stories from space. It has that feel to it with Mother Brain and a space dragon, you know, named Ridley, and Kraid, the big reptilian. But then it's mixed with that more grounded industrial H.R. Geiger alien kind of feel, where it's more tactile and more realized. And I do like a lot how the first Metroid really set that tone with the box art and the design, especially the Japanese box art. It has Samus in her bright orange red suit with the green lights, and it really stands out. And then in the background you have these H.R. Geiger style, like, ribbed, organic looking architecture. I do really like the the balance of that. And what's more is, one thing I always really found interesting about the first Metroid is how you'd have corridors that are just like, it looks like a creature, or it looks like an animal or some kind of alien head, and I'm not quite sure if that's like the husk of a dead alien, or if it's just a rock formation that happened to look like an alien. And just questions like that. The enemies, one thing about the first Metroid is the enemies are kind of goofy. They're just little spiky things and little bats or things that just kind of hover around. You don't really meet anything your size for the most part in the first Metroid. I mean, they're pretty big, and there are the Metroids, but for the most part, the enemies are just these little creatures that kind of waddle around and stick to surfaces. But it's definitely a good start for Metroid. Just looking at this this old artwork for Samus's suit. It has that very pulp feeling. Lots of little cables and wires, and lots of segments, and it's a little garish to look at. It definitely hasn't been. The Japanese box art is a lot better than some of the other designs. It's definitely going for a specific look. I definitely think, moving on to Metroid 2, that's definitely where Metroid 2 improved on. One is solidifying more of the look of Samus's suit, and two is sort of aligning the pulp science fictiony look of it, and the alien H.R. Geiger, and unifying the two aesthetics more, whereas they kind of clash in the first Metroid. In Metroid 2, they definitely align more. One thing that always bothered me, though, about one thing that bothers me whenever I see it is Metroid 2's box art. Let me see if I can find a clear image of it so I can. It's mainly the anatomy of Samus's suit in the Metroid 2 box art. It bothers me how bendy. Like, her suit has these very clear joints and segmentations on it. Yet in the box art, her boots are like bending as if they're made of rubber or something pliable. And her arm too. Her suit is just a little too. It's a little too flexible looking, just on the limbs and the segments. And that's something they very much, when they did Samus Returns, her suit it bends along the joints and the ligaments, not ligaments, segments. It bends along the joints and the segments of her suit, whereas before it's just they're more suggestions of how her suit is constructed, but they're just kind of bending on their own. But one thing I really do like is seeing the Metroids as a species and more of their environment. And again, they're more like they're leaning more into the xenomorph thing of them having the hatchlings and evolving into the different forms. I always thought it was really intimidating how the Omega Metroids in the original could fly, and I always pictured it as like their nucleus is what powers the flight, and so it's just kind of the rest of the body isn't really flying. It's kind of dragging the rest of its body by the nucleus to float upwards. And that's how the how it would continue flying. Oh, one thing I should mention is Metroid Prime, not Metroid Prime, is the first Metroid's music. A lot of it, like besides the main theme, obviously the doom 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 doom, that kind of thing. Besides that getting used, a lot of Metroid the first Metroid's music doesn't really get particularly like used later on. I think we have yet to hear a version of, Craig's later, the dun 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 do 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 do. We don't really. We have yet to hear that used in any other Metroid game. Besides something that's just a remake of the first Metroid. So Zero Mission, Zero Mission is just it's a retelling, it's a reimagining of the first Metroid. So of course it's there, but it hasn't been in Metroid Prime. There's a track in Metroid Prime 4. I think it's called Undergrowth, Fury Green Undergrowth. And I've heard some say that Kraid's lair is in there as a motif, but I don't know. It's just the part of it is the but that's a really basic. That's just kind of a basic kind of melodic sequence. It's just kind of a basic pattern. And I've heard it myself when I listen to that track, but I don't know if I'd really count that as a motif from I would count more of the da 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 as more of the motif rather than the underlying. It's a very general kind of melody or progression. I wouldn't be surprised if it just got, incidentally, using the same. It's like a really common, when you use common chord progressions, it's kind of a really standard kind of arpeggio. So I'm not sure. It could be. It very much could be. It's just a very general part of that track. It's not the part I would expect, if I would expect to use more of the driving melody of the whole piece rather than the underlying but that's its own thing. Metroid 2, on the other hand, its music is its music is mm, it occasionally for the Metroid fights will pull out something more, musical, but for the most part it's like bips and bops, and it's going for something more atmospheric. It definitely is. I think when it comes to Metroid 2, I like how the Metroids look more in game than they do in their artwork that they made for the original Metroid 2. Let me look up an Omega Metroid. Original Omega Metroid. Yeah. it's it's just kind of goofy looking. It has the two kind of gangly claws, oversized legs. It's just that I can't really imagine it moving very. When I picture it moving, it's just kind of goofy looking. That's not really too much of an issue. It's just of the time. I do appreciate it though. I really do. I think in game it looks a lot more believable than the artwork does. But I think that's pretty much it for Metroid 2. It sets up the story. It's got the Varia suit in it. It's got. Let me see if I can think of anything else really to say about it. Yeah, I'm looking at the sprite of the Metroid Queen. Yeah, the in-game sprites, to me are. It feels like to me the artwork later on and the redesigns definitely take more from the in-game sprites than they do from the official artwork that was made for the game. And in general, I think it's actually it was nice to have more. It felt more dangerous to have more enemies around Samus's size. I really like another Metroid 2 remakes version of Omega Metroids 2 with its really barrel-shaped head. I do like that. Oh, one thing I wish that had. I would love to see Metroid evolutions in a Prime game. There was a sketch as concept art for one of the Prime games of an Omega Metroid, and it looks really cool. I would love to see the different versions of the Metroids in a Prime game, like actually fighting them in 3D. That would be really, really cool to see. Because the Prime games, their Metroids they're just variants of the standard larval Metroid, the little jellyfish creature with the nucleus. One thing about the Metroids too is that I always saw them as having three eyes, something about the way the nucleus is positioned. I always saw it as like three eyes. But as I've gotten older, I've tried to train myself just to see it as not having a face and just having like a blob with teeth attached to it. Yeah, it would be really cool to see the different forms of Metroids in a Prime game proper. But I guess moving on to Super Metroid. Let's see. I think I clicked away from Metroids in release order to look up old pulp sci-fi. There we go. All Metroid games in order. Super Metroid. There we go. One thing, the first thing that I immediately really like about Super Metroid is I think it's the same artist from Metroid 2. I don't know for sure. But I really like how solid Samus's suit finally feels. And just the designs in general, I really. It really leans into the kind of pulp sci fi on the cover. The. Especially the way Ridley is drawn. But I really like how it's. The look of it is solidifying itself. And then you have Kraid with his goofy King Koopa proportions in the background. But Ridley and Samus at least. Ridley and Samus at least. Ooh, actually, there's an alternative box. No, the Japanese box art has a much better looking Kraid. Okay, that might just be something composited in there for other releases of the game, like goofy looking kind of cartoony Kraid. But looking at the Japanese box art, yeah, he's pretty much just as realized as the other two. I really like that. I like how realized Metroid is starting to feel in Super Metroid. It's the first game where you have Kenji Yamamoto doing the music. I do think that there's going from Kenji Yamamoto, going from Tanaka to Kenji Yamamoto. Hip Tanaka really leaned more into the music as like almost like sound design, where it's this heartbeat of a creature. It's like a living organism. I do think he leaned more into that than Kenji Yamamoto tended to. But I also really like at least until Prime. With Super Metroid, Kenji Yamamoto leaned more into melodies than Tanaka did. Like when you go to Metroid 1, the most melodic theme really is Kraid's lair. The do 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 do. It's a proper like dance, like ballroom dance. Almost waltz like. It's not really a waltz. It's more of a step. Do 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 do. Bum 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 bum. It's kind of a dance feel to it. But when you get to Super Metroid, you got more of the dun da 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 dun da 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 bum da da dun da da ba da da dun da 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 da. Dun 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 dun. No, that's Talon Overworld. I'm mixing them together. They're very similar. They're very similar, and probably on purpose. uh, Actually, was I just singing Talon over, or are they? Actually, I don't know. Oh, I don't know anymore. I always mix them up in my mind whenever I start singing them. I may have just completely mixed them up, or they share a melody, or they don't. Hmm. I don't know. I'm just gonna move on. I may have messed that up. I may haven't. I don't know. But but When you get to Super Metroid, it's definitely more melodic. The music's more, the overall music is more produced. You have the dun 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 dun, and the bum bum dum 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 dum. Bum 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 ba da dum bum bum ba dum bum ba dum da 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 dum bum bum ba da 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 dum. Yeah, and Meridia. I would love to hear Meridia, that theme reused in a Metroid Prime game. But that's definitely where you get Metroid from shifting away from overly pulp science fiction, and moving more into the alien influence with the environments. The aliens are more like your size. I think that's the first time you really get space pirates too. It's really leaning more into, but it's also where you get like the Edacoons and the Decoras, and you get the goofy robots with the two legs. So it still has that pulp science fiction feel to it with certain parts. It's got more of the pulp science fiction feel to it. Or not. It's still holding on to it, but it's got more of the alien H.R. Geiger kind of feel to it. And of course it's the one that really solidifies the gameplay of the whole thing. And this is kind of where I started asking Copilot like different things and helping trying to solidify more of my ideas on things. Hold on, I'm gonna sneeze. Uh, uh, am I? No, I'm not. Okay, I'm good. Okay. Oh, hold on. No, I'm good. Okay. But that's really where you get the solidifying of Metroid's general feel and tone. It's pretty much the benchmark of what everything else is going to do afterwards. And this is part of what I went through and tried to get my ideas more concise with Copilot on, which is here. Let me find. I wrote it down from the conversation that we had. Impact. Here it is. Some of the most defining elements of a series appear once, briefly, subtly, or in a single standout moment. The identity of a series isn't measured by frequency, it's measured by impact. And this is something I was writing down based on things that I've seen, and something that I wrote down as kind of a fallacy, especially when it comes to Metroid. It's let me see. It's the fallacy of, if something wasn't in every entry, then you shouldn't expect it. If something wasn't even in every entry and it was only in one game, it was never important, slash you why would you expect it to be in everything else? Slash that doesn't mean it has to be in everything. And that's when I asked about that's that part about identity isn't measured. A series identity isn't measured by frequency, it's measured by its impact. And the thing about Super Metroid is from here, it's one of those things where from here on, you it is a defining it is a defining piece of this series now. And no matter what you do now have to honor the what it gave and the direction that it innovated on and it explored and it defined and it refined. Metroid 1 and Metroid 2, I mean, just looking at their box art, looking at their music, looking at their impact, even though they were the first, they still weren't the defining. They weren't defining for Metroid as a whole. They left so much open to be refined, to be specified later, to be tightened up. The presentation, the approach, the music, the atmosphere, so much to be refined about everything. And Super Metroid is that first time where it all comes together in the way that says this is what this is. This is Metroid. This is there's no excuse me. There's no going back from this. There's no going back after this moment. This is it. You're set. This is your base point from here on, that everyone in some series there's sort of that thing where it's like, if you haven't interacted with it, it doesn't mean you're not a fan. It means that you are going to have a very limited perspective if you got into the series without ever interacting with this specific key part of it. There are just certain things you're not going to understand, certain things you're not going to be able to see, certain things you won't be able to respect or to honor about it. It's like only getting into Star Trek for Picard Season 3 and never having seen Next Gen or Deep Space Nine, or never having seen any of the original series movies, or understanding who Kirk is, or watching their excuse me, kitten, I'm sorry, excuse me, walking around my legs like or seeing that adventure where they saved the humpback whales. You're missing a key part if you only get into Picard Season 3 and it's got quality, but what does it have? It still has a completely distorted interpretation of the Federation. It still completely messes up the changelings, and the whole events of Deep Space Nine frames the Federation and Starfleet as having still lied and tricked and been deceitful and all this stuff. Them having voted not to give the cure. There's just so many parts that you're still gonna be exposed to all the junk and or the mutations that have come along the way. you're going to get lots of Borg everywhere. It's going to make you think that that's what Star Trek is. You're going to get weird, shady Federation. You're going to get that's a discussion for a whole other thing, but the key point is if you start there, the love of that hopefully would make you want to go back and understand things fully. At that point, it's like you I think it's different from something like Sonic, where, or even with Metroid, it's different from saying you're a 2D Metroid fan versus a 3D Metroid fan. Those are segmented enough, different experiences enough that, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Or, classic Sonic versus modern Sonic fan, that there is a distinction there. 2D Zelda, 3D Zelda. But when it comes to... But then there are some parts that transcend the amount of dimensions that you're playing in. With Star Trek, at that point, if you only like something like Picard Season 3, and you don't go back and see what built up to it, you're missing a lot of perspective. Your words and your opinions will have less weight behind them. You don't really have a full grasp of the series' legacy, identity, and tone and feel. You're still getting action set piece Borgs. They never set their phasers to stun anymore. It's just kill. Just lots more action. It's more actually, let me reframe it. It's less. You're not getting that true Star Trek experience, and it's diluted. You're not so much a fan of Star Trek at that stage as you are a fan of those sort of outside... It's like... I'm trying to think of a good analogy. Like watered down juice, you drink it, and if you only like it when it's like that, it's more like you're a fan of the water mixed with the lemon, that, or the punch. I can't think of a great analogy, but hopefully the idea is coming across. The experience is diluted. It's missing. You're not getting the true look at what makes this what it is. And so, you owe it to yourself to go back and see what part of this watered down drink you're a fan of more so. Are you more of a fan of the juice part or of the water, if that makes sense? Or are you only a fan of when it's the watered down juice, and maybe you just want to stick in that area? But it does give less credence and weight to your opinion if you try to then use that to inform the rest of the series or the show or whatever property or story it is. It's more... you don't have something. You're missing perspective. And that's kind of how it is with Super Metroid. Super Metroid is that moment where if you're missing that, you're missing a key part of what makes Metroid Metroid. You're missing a key element. Your perspective is now incomplete. Because it is the quintessential. It is the rawest. Actually, no. I mean, Metroid 1 is the rawest. That is the most potent. Like, every ingredient coming together. It is, if you looked it up in the dictionary, that is the picture they would show. It's like looking up what a dog is, and you don't get like a picture of some prehistoric canine or the early domestication process. What do you get? You get like a picture of a golden retriever. That is it's the quintessential dog, if that makes sense. Super Metroid is the quintessential dog. It is getting the picture of the golden retriever. And so, whereas Metroid 1 and 2 is like seeing the weird medieval sketch of some like prehistoric early domestication dog and getting to see that. So Super Metroid's one of those things where you can engage if you like with how you want the series to be and how to look, but you do have a lot less power behind your words and a lot less credibility and credence, because then it comes more into question, well, do you like the water or do you like the juice? Which part? Which part of... If you like the water more, maybe you might consider going to a series that is the water. If you like the juice more, then go to the series that is the juice. And what the juice is changes depending on what the series is. The juice is whatever the series is. Like... And it's what makes the series that series. It is what makes it that genre. It's like, why would I want every game to be the same game? Why would I want... you go to a specific genre to play that genre. Why would I want to make every game the game I already enjoyed and just play the same game over and over and over? I'll take the juice. One strawberry juice, lemon juice, so on. You get the idea. I'm going to drop this whole juice analogy. But that is what Super Metroid represents. It's the core of the flavor of the genre. Yeah. And I one thing I really like about Super Metroid as well is just the sheer amount of hidden interactions inside of it. There's the classic one. You got the Crystal Flash. That's a secret thing. You got the different beam types if you unequip other beams. You've got the sheer amount of exploration and open-endedness. You've got a lot more just like alien creatures around your size or bigger. And there's a lot more trying to figure out how exactly to... You feel more like you're hunting, I guess you could say, in Super Metroid. Especially when it comes to enemies. You're more of an explorer in the first two. Well, I guess Metroid 2, you are literally hunting. But Super Metroid is the first time, I think, where the overall experience finally hits that feeling of hunting. Every aspect of it, hunting through the world, hunting down enemies, figuring out how to defeat them, hunting for clues. The whole thing finally feels like it's finally there. I do really want to see Dragon in another game, like realized in 3D. Even if it's a 2D 3D, like Metroid Dread is, with 3D models but 2D gameplay. But I do have a lot more I do have a lot more Metroids to talk about, so I'm gonna pause on Super Metroid for now. With that, oh, I do really like Spore Spawn as well. The whole idea of a fungal, it's not your typical jungle. It's all spores and fungus and mold. I do like that a lot. I do the especially alien environment as well in Super Metroid. I really like those. I really like how it goes for more of spores and things like that. I kind of want to see a picture of it really quick. Super Metroid. There we go. Jungle. Brinstar jungle floor. Yeah, it's got like the vines everywhere, and it's got all the spores and spore spawn as well, but it's got like the alien fruit and the plants and like all the weird vines. Ugh. I really like it. Something about leaning more into that not like tropical. It's not tropical, which is something I really like. It's like weird, gross green. It's leaning more into like the weird kind of green, mixing almost like tendrils with vines. I do really like that. But anyway, I better continue on because I want to talk about Metroid Fusion. I think Fusion is the one where I'll have the most to talk about in terms of like specifics. I mean, it has the most specifics out of most 2D Metroid games. It's very story led. But one thing is, that is one game I would really want to see remade in 3D, first person 3D, is Metroid Fusion. Its whole like space station thing mixed with like being stuck on a space station, and it's like a mixture of the thing. It's a mix of the thing mixed with Alien. And like some of the set pieces. Oh man, I would love to see the sector, the Metroid breeding sector, getting jettisoned into space. Oh, I really love that visual of Samus standing on the edge of the station in just that little tunnel, and you just see space outside right after that portion gets jettisoned off towards the planet. I would love to see that sequence realized in proper like first person 3D. And seeing, oh man, if you could like get more of like a Dead Space look. Oh man. More of that mixed with Metroid Fusion, but with like prime first person, leaning more into sort of a Dead Space like look, set on the BSL station during the X-Parasite breakout. Because X-Parasites, it's one of those things where it's almost like the gag character being super strong, because you get the flood in Halo, you get the infection in Dead Space, you get the fungus in The Last of Us. That all these other things, they're so gritty and trying to be realistic that they define them to the point where they're credible enough to be beaten. But with Metroid, like, no, there is you're dead. If you get stuck in a place with X parasites, it's over. Samus is the only one. Unless you have some Metroids handy. Samus is it. That's it. Everyone else is gone. Within I mean, you look at Metroid Dread. They were contained with the X parasites were contained in Elune, and within seconds of being released. Oh, I'll get to that later. But like X parasites, they just you, there's just nothing you can do. It's over. You have to the whole planet has to go. The whole whatever you're standing in, it just has to go. It's over. There's no saving it. And I that feeling of just the game starts out trying to have hope that there's survivors and that not everything, and then it just all slips out of Samus's hands. There's nothing she can do. You can't even make it in time. It's over. And if you threw X parasites, that's the thing about them, is because the setting isn't trying to be so gritty and realistic and realized as a lot of those other settings where it's like, we need to make a reasonable way for people to combat this. Like, no, there's if you threw the X parasites into Halo, it would be over. If you threw the X parasites, that they could just infect the flood and and take their DNA, and they would assimilate them into the X hive mind. Even a little baby X, you just stick it on a grave mind and it's over. It'll become assimilated within seconds. It'll be assimilated as an X, and it'll just take its biomass and leave, and then that's it. Oh, I keep wanting to skip to Dread, the way that Dread depicted X parasites, but I'll get to that later. But when if you threw X parasites into Dead Space, oh man, it would be over. Oh man, especially looking at what the X parasites do in Metroid Dread with the whole biomass nests and the way that they just dip into biomass and just no, the Brethren Moons, that whole thing, they are just a feast. They are a biomass feast waiting for an X parasite, one little baby X parasite to just drop into it, and it's over. They'll have taken over. They so much as touch, and it's over. It assimilate all the DNA, all the biomass. A Brethren Moon, a single X parasite touches it, and it's over. The whole thing will be assimilated by an X parasite, and you know what? It'll then go to another Brethren Moon and assimilate that as well. And you know how X parasites kind of can combine into you get X Brethren Moons, and then they would combine into each other into into even bigger giant X parasite brethren. Oh man. Yeah, no, you want those contained to Metroid, and that'll get into something later that I'll talk about when it comes to Samus and her adventures and all that. But yeah, no, X parasites, they are scarily effective at what they do, and every encounter people have had with them has always been early and catching it just on time. And if you don't, But Metroid Fusion, I really like. I like its execution, but even more than that, I like its ideas. I like the idea a lot of the SAX. I like the box robot that follows you around and has the brain inside of it. I love the slow decay of the BSL station over the course of it, and hearing like something is destroying something over in this area and you have no idea what it is, and then all power cuts out and now you're on your own. You just got to find some way to another sector, and the entire place is just getting more hostile as you go along and getting more and more weaponized against you. And it's just I really like. I would love to see it more realized. But another thing that's really interesting is about Metroid Fusion, I think, is the context in which it was meant to be played. The thing about Metroid Fusion and the reason it's structured the way it is that it was meant to be played on a handheld. So it's not like Super Metroid where you were meant to go for long stretches and then hopefully, you get back and you remember where you were. It was meant to be that, you're on a bus ride. You're commuting, you're going somewhere, and you get Adam to tell you about something, and then you go do a bite-sized sort of mission structure, a microstructure. He's like, this is the thing you're gonna do. Oh, this is a warning over here. Something's going wrong. We need you to. Well, we'll need you to go collect this, and then you go do that. Boop 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 boop. A little mission, and then you're at work or you're at school. Put it away. Come back later. He'll be like, Samus, this is what's gonna happen here. But they still preserved the Metroid feeling of it by throwing in those twists of like, okay, I can't help you now. Like this, they sealed the doors. You're just gonna have to find your own way in. Things like that. And I definitely feel like we're playing Metroid Fusion in the wrong context nowadays, where you just go from, where you just play it in long stretches from beginning to end. Because once you have that context that was made in, it starts to make a lot more sense. And of course Zero Mission will come later and show that it was never mandatory to do that. It wasn't necessary. But for what Fusion is, because Zero Mission, it doesn't have that narrative structure. It doesn't do anything like that. It's like it's Super Metroid style, but a little more, even more refined in terms of like guiding you and things like that. But in terms of narrative, it doesn't do the whole bite-sized adventure. But that's something I really like about Fusion, is that just because Zero Mission showed you didn't need it doesn't make Fusion unnecessary. It just adds its own flavor to the whole thing. It's like getting a small chapter, and then you put it away and you kind of think about it while you're at school, or it's like, oh man, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen to the BSL station? And then it's like, oh, there were no survivors. Okay, what now? Oh, there was a Metroid sector. Okay, now what now? And then you keep coming back into it, and then you complete the until you finally mission complete. You have to blow up the whole planet because that's it. The planet's gone. It's it's lost. You got to get rid of it. But I just remembered something I wanted to talk about later. Thinking about that. Hold on, I'm gonna write that down. Oh, excuse me, kitten. You're standing right on the mouse. I wonder how long this is gonna be. This is probably gonna be pretty long. Hold on. Dark Samus in Metroid Prime 2 versus Silux in Prime 4. Okay. That'll be for later. But One thing about what was I just talking about? Yeah, just having to eliminate the planet. It's over. But one thing, one thing that oh yeah, one thing I did want to talk about was Samus's zero suit. I don't like it. I don't. I don't like her whole zero suit thing. Like I really do prefer the more athletic wear that Samus has in the 100% ending of Fusion, and her zero suit. It's not that I don't. I dislike the idea of the zero suit. I just don't like its design. It's this big garish blue thing with all these lines in it, and a big garish bodysuit. It's like, ugh, why does it look like that? I've never liked it since the beginning, whether it was Smash Brothers or whether it was adopted later in Zero Mission. I've never ever liked the Zero suit. It's just gross. It just bothers me to no end. I don't like that big blue one, like skin tight latex onesie look. I'm just not, just don't feel it. But speaking of suits, though, the fusion suit, I always like the detail of the fusion suit. How Samus has to like carry her arm cannon. It's, you can see that it's physically heavier on her than when she was in Super Metroid, where she could just stick her arm out. But when she's in the fusion suit, she actually has to carry the weight of it with her other hand. It's almost more like a shotgun than it feels more weighty, kind of like a shotgun than it did before. It gives it that feel with the kind of underhand thing that she has to do with it. And Adam, he's not terrible. He's I mean, he fits the role of an emotionless computer. And I do like the monologues that Samus has as well. I don't mind seeing into her thoughts particularly. It's like one of those things where it's like I wouldn't clamor to get rid of it. If it wasn't there, that would be okay too, but I do unlike in Prime 4 where she just stays silent the entire time. I do appreciate that they had her respond to Adam. I do like that. She is capable. She's not silent protagonist. She just exists in the universe of Metroid, where she never has anyone to talk to. Unlike Link, who is presented with lots of opportunities to speak, and he just doesn't. Samus does not get that chance. Who exactly would she talk to? But when she has someone to talk to, she does talk. She does speak. I'm just trying to think of other things in Fusion. Like, I do have to get through more Metroid games, so I can't really stop right now to... Oh, the Omega Metroid. I really like the design of the Omega Metroid in Metroid Fusion. It still has those kind of goofy, oversized, like, claws, mainly on its legs, the feet and the legs. That part, it does give me a harder time to take it seriously. But if I can accept that because of the rest of the design, I really like how it has the stumpy tail, how the end of the tail is cut off. One thing I find interesting is the whole how there can only be one Metroid Queen at a time. And we see from its... because it's a clone of the Metroid baby, and there's kind of a theory, or because the Metroid Queen was just killed, and that's the last Metroid, so there's a chance that that Metroid was going to become a Metroid Queen. Besides whatever they say about it getting bombarded with rays from the space pirates, and that made it super big. But I don't remember if it getting bombarded with rays just led to the weird offspring. There was something about that. But, well, it's also the fact that we actually see in Metroid Fusion that Metroid still grows into an oversized creature. Even without those... It still grows into an oversized larva, even without the beta Metroid rays. Or Metroid rays. Even without the rays they hit it with, it still grew into that oversized shell. Which is interesting. It still became that oversized Metroid larva. And it jumped straight to being an Omega Metroid. Which, to me, if I read into that, it seems like that the baby Metroid, it was going to become a Metroid Queen, and that's why it became oversized. And it was almost like gonna skip straight to the Queen phase from being a larva. And now I wonder if... Well, the thing is that Samus now has that baby's DNA. I wonder if Samus is occupying the spot of the Metroid Queen. And that's why this clone of the baby Metroid, it skipped to the final stage, but because the role of Metroid Queen is now occupied by Samus's DNA, that it biologically couldn't jump to being a Metroid Queen, so it instead jumped to being an Omega Metroid. It went straight from larva to Omega Metroid. And not only that, an unusually powerful Omega Metroid as well. Unusually powerful. So I wonder, it's sort of like a dark reflection of the baby Metroid. Only it just couldn't become a queen. Because I think about the other instance of a Metroid Queen, which was an Other M, and Samus hadn't actually fused with the baby Metroid yet. So it was possible for a queen to grow. Anyway, the other sort of key element that I kind of want to talk about in regards to that is... The other key element I want to talk about there is the behavior of the SAX at the end. The way how the SAX is, even in like self-destruct, it's like the SAX and the X-Parasites in general, they'll just prioritize their safety in some kind of instinctual sense rather than a logical sense. So there's just things that override their behavior. So the presence of an Omega Metroid immediately set the X-Parasites in the pursuit of eliminating it. Despite the fact that the station was going to blow, despite all kinds of stuff, they didn't even try to sabotage Samus's exit. It jumped straight to trying to eliminate the biggest threat to their safety, which was the fact that there was an Omega Metroid on board. And it sacrificed itself for Samus, but not because it cared about Samus or some kind of, spiritual connect. It wasn't anything like empathetic. It was purely for survival. We need to, I have the means to defeat this Omega Metroid with my Ice Beam. Oh no, it's damaged me to the point I can't do it. Here, you clearly also you need to destroy this Omega Metroid. Here, have the Ice Beam. You kill it now. And so it's like X-Parasites get like hyper fixated on minimizing whatever the threat is, even if it's pointless and the whole station is going to blow. They just seem to instinctually get hyper focused because they're not entirely intelligent. Even when they absorb like intelligent beings, they don't immediately become human or whatever the species is. They don't immediately gain. They don't gain cognizance. They don't gain. They don't gain any cognizance or sentience really out of it. Otherwise, there were a ton of other things the SAXs could have done. Probably hacked into different state systems on the station, or just remotely, or also interfaced with Samus's ship. There were a couple things acted more like her, but instead it's just an instinct-driven hunter. It doesn't even try to impersonate her personality. It just goes straight for the kill. It's still missing key components, and in the end, it just acts in its own self-interest. It doesn't even try to work with Samus. It just tries to take over the fight itself. So it seems that ex-parasites, they have a sort of single-mindedness when they're presented with something, and I'll bring that up later for Metroid Dread. But and another thing I like about Metroid Fusion is, again, something later for Dread, is how much of a biological element it brings, not just to the whole story, but also to Samus's suit as well, which I'll again continue that later. But it's also the last time we see Ridley. And technically, Samus has Ridley's DNA inside of her body now. I wonder that Samus ate Ridley. This whole relationship between them began with, I know it's technically not the Ridley, but it is a clone of the Ridley. So genetically speaking, it's still Ridley. So, her whole relationship began with him, eating and killing friends and family, and their journey ends with Samus eating him. The journey ends with Samus eating Ridley and assimilating his DNA into her body. So Samus now has... Yeah, Samus has Ridley. If you would be able to get Ridley DNA out of her, if you potentially wanted to, or she could even express. That's kind of interesting. I wonder if, obviously, it's nothing actually in the game or the story, but I wonder if you could come up with a story idea where part of why Samus becomes even more, besides like the whole Metroid thing, where obviously she becomes hyper aggressive as like the sort of Metroid hunger, just pinning things down to the ground and just pulling the energy out of them. But I wonder if you could contribute, story-wise, part of Samus's increased hand-to-hand, physicality, because in Other M they have the whole, when you come into contact with a Metroid and it fell on you, it makes you more combative. But I wonder if her also absorbing the DNA of all those creatures also could have contributed to her behavior being more aggressive and combat-oriented in Metroid Dread. If she's kind of, she's got that sort of Ridley species instinct in there as well, and all those different creature types. That would be interesting. using his skills now. Some of his, she already had her own skills, but now add on to that the more aggressive animalistic nature that Ridley has, and suddenly she's just more of a killer, more of a hunter, more hunter than bounty, that kind of thing. But all right, I gotta move on from Fusion now. I shouldn't get too in depth on a lot of these. Let's see. What's next? Next up is... Let me check my notes to make sure that I'm not missing anything as I'm talking. Moments of levity, X parasites being released. No, that's for later. That's for dread learning some kind of another part of the BSL state. That's for later. The 3 EMMI, that's for later. Then in there, but can't access the fallacy of evolving and expand. That's for later. Silux's dumb dragons. That's for later. That's for later. Okay, Metroid Prime. I mean, I recently, about a year ago, well, about 2 years ago, I played Metroid Prime Remastered. Excuse me. And it really does hold up. I even love the fact that there is no autosave, and you just have to survive from save station to save station. And it is, barring some hiccups, it is a really well-paced game. It's shorter than Prime 4, but it feels more like an actual complete arc and story than Prime 4 does. Because of the way it's paced. And even the key hunt, you can mitigate that quite a bit. And when I did the key hunt, I was expecting something, it's the 2000s fetch quest, Wind Waker had that too, and quite a few other games. But I was expecting the key hunt to be very different, but they actually did a lot to expand more of the world as you were looking for some of those keys. Like, some of them really were just like, shoot a missile at this rock. But then again, those were all the ones you could get before you even needed to go search for the keys in the first place, as long as you were just paying attention. And then there were other ones that were more like, yeah, you had to get them later, but they also did really good at making sure that it wasn't just, okay, go retread all these areas. There was one. The one that I really think was dumb is the one where you have to shoot the tower and Phendrana drifts. You have to shoot this particular thing that is nowhere else in the game, and they've never made you have to shoot before, and it just looks like a set piece. It's like this particular explosive thing, and you have to shoot a missile or a super missile at it or something. I don't remember it exactly right now. And this hasn't been a thing before, and you shoot the tower and it falls over. And it's like, okay. That was the one where I had to look it up, because I really didn't know what I was supposed to use to knock the tower down over with. But even then, the tower falling over, it changes the terrain, and that's something they did a really good job with, was changing the terrain. Another thing that Metroid Prime does is it's a lot like Super Metroid, but again, it's very honoring of Super Metroid, and it does a really good job of expanding it. But besides that, the another thing that Metroid Prime does particularly well is getting the most out of every area in the game. Like, it's very tiring having to backtrack through Magmore Caverns like over a dozen times. I think the most exciting area to find new spaces in was probably Phendrana Drifts and Talon Overworld. I loved how even at the end of the game, I was still finding more spaces in Talon Overworld. And that like big room in Phendrana Drifts with the ice on the floor, like, oh, I really like that. That is another thing about Metroid Prime is I don't like the boss fights for the most part. I really there's only one boss fight in Metroid Prime that I really like, but for the most part, boss fights in Metroid Prime they just kind of take forever, or they're just kind of unwieldy and they're not fun exactly to engage with. The actual act of interacting with them, like I get it, but it's like, this fight it's like a little too long. It's a little too repetitive. It's a little too of the same thing. Like and I'll get into the visors in just a second, and how I don't really like the visors from a gameplay, from the way they're executed. I'm not really a fan of the visors, but talking about like boss fights, like one is it doesn't have a particularly great amount a great amount of key boss fights. Like Metroid Prime's bosses, you'll get the big aliens and more direct fights, like with Flagra or of course I'm blanking on his name the moment I go to think about it. It starts with a T. Hold on. Thardis. Like, but Thardis is a rock. He's a collection of rocks. Another boss fight is like it's just like a machine that shoots wasps. that just kind of sends wasps at you. There are two whole boss fights in Metroid Prime whose gimmick is wasps and throwing wasps at you. One is just a flamethrower. What is a flamethrower? A weaponized flamethrower, and the other is it's just like a Chozo statue that shoots more wasps at you. And they're okay. I do love the diagonal room that boss that opened up my mind to so many possibilities. Was walking into that room and just seeing the whole thing slanted. Metroid Prime 4 has no slanted rooms like that, and that makes me upset. I'll get to that in a second as well. Let me write this down before I forget it. Painterly rooms. But that I love that slant, the whole room just like sinking inward. Oh, it's so good. But Metroid Prime, it has like it's got bosses. I mean, my favorite boss in Prime probably is Metroid Prime itself. And the music for that part. I may have to stop for today. I got through the first those classic Metroids. I may have to stop. Metroid Classic versus Metroid Prime visors. Let's see. Let me write down some notes before I forget. Visors. Metroid Prime 2 presentation, music. Okay. I think I may just stop today halfway with what I've discussed. Hold on, let me check something. Let's see. Is there anything I can talk about really quick without getting into too much stuff? Okay, well, I'll just keep talking about the Metroid Prime boss fight for now. But Metroid Prime, that boss fight's music is really just unlike anything else in Metroid in general. Just those, but it's so Metroid at the same time. You have those chords that are just, you know, the vibrato and just the voice going, you know, it's embodying that philosophy. And this is what I was talking about earlier, how Metroid Prime does a lot more with the original first Metroid's philosophy when it came to music than 2D Metroids do. It leans way more into that experimental like line of what the music is versus what the sound effects or what's supposed to be coming from the environment, and the boom doom boom doom boom doom boom boom, that and the drums. I really like that. One thing that is really disappointing was was getting into the impact crater, downloading the map, and seeing that it was like a single room in a hallway, and that was it. And it was like, oh man, this is before they were bought by Nintendo, and they did not have time to finish this area. And it's so, you're seeing the planet getting converted into a creature, into an actual organic being. You get to see the teeth coming out and like the mouth pellets, and the whole thing is morphing. The whole thing is morphing into a creature inside of the impact crater. And I think I'm gonna have to pause. Let's see. I've got something. The reason is I've got something I've planned, so I'm gonna check really quick. If not, I might just take a break and upload this part, and then get back to it with like another part. But yeah, seeing the planet getting convert. Oh, that was kind of one of the core things, is that I really like how much Metroid Prime, because it's its own self-contained thing, and it gets to disconnect itself from the continuity of Metroid 2, Metroid 3, Super Metroid, Metroid Fusion. It doesn't have to continue the story. Actually, hold on just a sec. I'll have to pause here. Okay, I had to go take care of something really quick. But what I was talking about is I really like how pulp science fiction-y Metroid Prime, how much Retro Studios leaned. They brought back the really, because Fusion, and this is something I'll lean more into, because Fusion maintained what makes Metroid Metroid, but precariously balanced it with, and that's why I brought up the format of Prime, not Prime, of Fusion, because when you take that into account, I think it increases just how the feel of how much they balanced it and what they were going for. But I think even if you play through straight with Metroid Fusion, that it still did a good job of maintaining what makes that feel of Metroid. While doing something new with it. But and expanding it and evolving it. I'm using those words specifically because I'm going to bring that up again later. Specifically those things. But there's something about Metroid Prime, the way they do Samus intercepting a distress signal and going to investigate and finding these. They found a way to reintroduce that pulp science fiction feeling without making it feel tacky or cheesy and corny, like it was more in the first Metroid, and like those stories tended to be. They found a way to bring up that high concept science fiction feel while also still balancing it out with that alien H.R. Geiger kind of tone and aesthetic. You have Samus intercepting a distress signal from a alien spaceship, and she gets there, and if it turns out they've been experimenting with a strange substance. They've been experimenting with a strange substance. And it turned on it all messed up for them because they just made the wrong kind of creature, and it destroyed all of them. It destroyed the inside of the ship. You got like a cyborg version of Ridley, and then you got a giant mutant bug, and it all goes crashing down. And then you get there, and you have to stop like a giant plant creature, and this mutagen is taking over the wildlife. And you find the space pirate lab later, where you find they were doing further experiments. And you have the Chozo who are there. They're sort of like this ancient spiritualist race. And actually, let me write that down for later too. I'm going to want to talk about the Chozo and the fact of whether they are alive or dead. Presence in the story. Tribes. Okay. But, yeah, my voice is almost out of it. I won't be able to talk much longer. But, you got the Chozo, and they've got this sort of like spiritualist bent to them, and it's that perfect high concept science fiction thing where they're a mix of. I know the Talon 4 Chozo, they had a whole thing about like abandoning technology and going to live with nature and trying to get back to their roots and enlighten themselves, but they still very clearly have technology. I mean, they're still very clearly the technology there. Unlike other Chozo civilizations, for them the technology was to just give them the time and the space to focus on their enlightenment and study and looking inward and trying to solve more like spiritual problems. They're still technologically advanced. They didn't like throw out all their spaceships and their tech and stuff like that. Otherwise they would be stuck trying to figure out how to survive, That's what they would be doing the whole time. But instead what they did is they used their technology to give themselves time to look into art, to ease themselves of the basic parts of survival so that they could focus on art and sculpture and research, study, agriculture, but not for survival, just agriculture for agriculture, to grow things and to look at biology and life and look at life cycle, the whole open up their minds kind of thing. It's a very classic science fiction kind of thing. And the sort of blur between is it magic, is it science stuff, have they just like transcended matter, and you get that with the Chozo ghosts. But the thing with the way that Phazon interacts with the Chozo ghost. It kind of implies that it's not literally magic, or it's not spirits in the fantasy sense. I mean, even if you look at the original Lord of the Rings, its explanation for a lot of things wasn't just it's magic, or it's just mystical. It's more like when these guys are speaking into the wind with their words, they're literally interacting with the fabric of reality. Fire magic doesn't just happen because magic. They're literally like it's almost like console commands. They're commanding the fabric of reality to produce these effects, and they're literally speaking to. It's not just magic. There are spirits, but spirits have there's a system behind it. There's like different reasons for why spirits exist. It's like they're residual energy. It's their souls, but their souls isn't just some esoteric thing. It's a literal material. It's a type of existence, that kind of thing. So it's a similar thing with Metroid Prime, with the Chozo ghosts and the way the Phazon interacts with them and all that. Is that the Chozo ghosts? They are ghosts and spirits, but not in the Victorian, not in the myth, not in the totally myth point of view, not in a what's the word that I'm looking for? Fantastical. I'll instead frame it for what it is more treated like, which is that it's a state of existence. They ascended into another kind of existence. Their ghosts are them being in another plane. It's them being in another state of existence, another plane of reality. That they've ascended the material plane into some other aspect or dimension, that kind of thing. And it's super sci-fi like that. Kind of reminds me of Professor Layton. It's it's not time travel. We just built an entire replica of London underneath the city. It just built an entire replica of the city underneath, and they're all paid actors, or were kidnapped. There aren't vampires. It was hallucinogenic gas. The entire that has a very specific effect. Maybe I'll talk about that later. The village was robots. The entire, the whole it wasn't magic. It was just hyper-specific, improbable science. The entire. I'll think about that later. But back to Metroid. I really like. It's back to Metroid Prime. I really like how it balances a more matured sense of that science fiction with. It balances a more matured sense of that science fiction with the more H.R. Geiger alien type stuff. Here, let me take a look. My notes. Thinking about Professor Layton. Let's see. Um, well, let me think. Let me just think through what actually happens in the game. I guess. Hmm. I guess it would. This would be a good time to talk about the difference in music between Metroid Prime 1 and Prime 2. You know what? Let me stop here and upload this. Rest for a second and then come back.